Before there was a nation, before there was a flag that stood for freedom, there were men who stood in the mud, muskets in hand, daring to dream of liberty. It was the spring of 1775. The birth of the United States Army. Gunfire echoes through the green fields of Massachusetts. Smoke rolls through the air. Farmers, blacksmiths, and teachers, ordinary people, stare down the mightiest empire on earth. Britain. Out of chaos rose unity, and out of rebellion, discipline. The Continental Congress formed the Continental Army, and at its head stood a tall, stoic Virginian, General George Washington. The Army's birth wasn't marked by ceremony or fanfare. It was carved in hunger, cold, and sacrifice. The American Revolution tested every fiber of early America's will. The soldiers had little more than courage-worn boots, thin coats, and the conviction that liberty was worth dying for. At Valley Forge, in the winter of 1777, men froze in their tents. They buried friends in the snow, but under Baron von Steuben's, a ragged army learned discipline. From those icy mornings, the foundation of the U.S. Army's professional corps was born. Organization, courage, and resilience. Discipline, von Steuben wrote, is the soul of an army. Those words still echo through every American boot camp to this day. The revolution ended with victory, but the new army faced an identity crisis. America distrusted standing armies. They feared tyranny. So the army shrank to a shadow of itself, guarding forts on the frontier. Yet the frontier never slept. Native wars, expansion, and border threats demanded readiness. From the Mississippi to the Atlantic, small detachments held outposts, defending settlers, mapping territory, and building roads, laying the groundwork for a nation that was still becoming. In those early decades, the army wasn't just about fighting. It was about building roads, bridges, forts, and a sense of nationhood. Every mile paved was a step toward power. When the War of 1812 erupted, the young army once again faced Britain, now a battle-tested empire. At first, the Americans stumbled. Disorganization, lack of training, and political division. But then came the moment that reshaped the Army's reputation. The Battle of New Orleans. Under General Andrew Jackson, American troops, frontiersmen militia, and regulars defeated a superior British force. The victory proved something crucial. With leadership and will, the U.S. Army could stand toe-to-toe with any empire. The world had begun to take notice, and so had the American people. The 19th century was the era of manifest destiny. The Army marched west alongside pioneers, engineers, and dreamers, building forts that later became cities. Each campaign against native tribes was a harsh lesson in terrain, strategy, and logistics. These were wars fought not only with bullets, but with maps and endurance. The Army learned to fight in mountains, plains, and deserts. Knowledge that would one day help it fight across the world. By 1846, the U.S. turned its gaze south toward Mexico. The Mexican-American War would be the Army's first modern campaign. It was a testing ground for future legends. Ulysses S. Grant, Robert E. Lee, William Tecumseh Sherman, young officers who would later face each other in a war that would define America itself. The Mexican campaign was a proving ground. For the first time, America projected its power beyond its borders, and new technologies, like the telegraph and artillery, showed how warfare was changing. As the Army raised the flag over Mexico City in 1847, it sent a message to the world. The United States was no longer a regional player. It was a rising power. Then came the war that would tear the nation apart and make the Army stronger than ever before. When the Civil War broke out in 1861, the Army split in two. Brother against brother, commander against commander. But it was in this conflict that the United States Army transformed from a frontier force into a modern machine of industry and innovation. Factories turned out rifles by the thousands. Railroads carried supplies and troops across states. Telegraphs coordinated entire campaigns. And for the first time, photography showed the real face of war, not glory, but grief. The Army was no longer an idea of patriotism. It was an institution of power, discipline, and technology. Ulysses Grant, once a humble soldier from Ohio, understood that to win this war, he had to break the enemy's will, not just their army. His campaigns were merciless in strategy yet human in intention, to end the bloodshed as fast as possible. Sherman's march to the sea was brutal but effective. Rail lines burned, supplies destroyed, and the Confederacy's back was broken. These men redefined warfare. They introduced logistics, coordination, and unrelenting momentum tactics that would later shape American military doctrine for centuries. 600,000 lives were lost. Families shattered, citas borned. But out of the ashes rose a united nation and a hardened army. It was no longer a militia of volunteers. It was a professional force, capable, strategic, and ambitious. The Civil War taught America its most important lesson, that unity and preparation are the foundations of strength. From that moment on, the U.S. Army would never again be unprepared for war. The post-war Army became a laboratory of modern ideas. The use of railroads, telegraphs, and rapid mobilization made the United States a different kind of nation, one that understood how to combine industry with military might. Young officers who survived the Civil War would later lead America into global conflicts, armed with the lessons of organization, innovation, and resilience. Through mud, frost, fire, and blood, the U.S. Army was forged, not in victory but in sacrifice. From Lexington to Appomattox, it became the shield and sword of a new nation. The flag they carried through war was no longer a symbol of rebellion. It was the promise of a united future. Wind whispers through rows of white gravestones. A bugle plays taps. The camera pans across the silent fields where the Army's soul was born. The bravery of our past is the strength of our future. After the fires of the Civil War faded, the United States stood bruised but unbroken, and its army rebuilt from the ashes of brotherly conflict emerged, ready to shape a new destiny. The country turned west once more, sending soldiers across endless plains and towering mountains to secure a frontier that stretched toward the Pacific. The Army became the builder of the nation's bones-laying telegraph lines, guarding settlers and establishing forts that would one day become thriving cities. In the stillness of the frontier wind, discipline met determination, and each soldier knew that they were not only protecting land, but defining what America would become. As the 19th century neared its end, the nation began to look outward, no longer content to be isolated behind oceans. When war erupted with Spain in 1898, the U.S. Army, still small by European standards, proved its might in Cuba and the Philippines, marking the first time America fought not for survival but for influence. The victory was swift, decisive, and symbolic, a declaration that the United States had stepped onto the world stage. The soldiers who raised the flag over San Juan Hill carried more than rifles, they carried the future weight of empire. The Army grew, adapted, and modernized, trading horses for steel, sabers for repeating rifles, and open fields for trenches. By the dawn of the 20th century, its mission had changed forever. The United States was now a rising industrial giant, and its army was learning to fight not just with courage, but with science. New technologies, machine guns, airplanes, and motorized transport hinted at the wars of tomorrow. When World War I engulfed Europe in 1914, America at first watched from afar, hesitant to send its sons into the slaughter. But by 1917, when the call came, the Army answered. Millions of young Americans crossed the Atlantic, carrying the ideals of democracy into a world consumed by darkness. Under General John J. Pershing, the American Expeditionary Forces trained, fought, and bled across France, turning the tide in battles like Contigny, Saint-Mihiel, and the Meuse-Argonne. The world watched as a once-isolated nation proved its resolve and firepower on foreign soil. The doughboys fought with a mix of innocence and ferocity, their youth hardened by mud, gas, and relentless shell fire, yet their courage unshaken. When the guns finally fell silent in 1918, the United States Army had transformed once again, no longer a domestic guardian, but a global force of liberation and power. From the blood-soaked fields of Europe to the silent shores of home, America's soldiers carried with them a new identity. They were not just defenders of their country, but defenders of freedom itself. As they marched through the arches of victory, The world began to understand that a new kind of power had risen on an army not built on conquest, but on conviction. The 20th century awaited, and with it, the destiny of a superpower. The Great War had ended, but the scars it left on the world were deep. As soldiers returned home, the United States stood on the edge of a new era, powerful yet cautious, victorious yet uncertain. The army downsized, its massive wartime machinery stored away, its veterans rebuilding their lives in quiet towns and busy cities. Yet beneath that peace, the world was shifting again. The United States tried to stay neutral, but the army quietly prepared, modernizing weapons, training troops, and watching the storm clouds gather. Then came December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor, the day that changed everything. The shock of the attack ignited a fire that swept across the nation, and within hours, America's industrial heart roared to life. The army expanded from hundreds of thousands to millions, factories working day and night to arm them. This was the birth of the arsenal of democracy, an unstoppable combination of manpower, technology, and determination. From the deserts of North Africa to the beaches of Normandy, the U.S. Army became a force of liberation, its soldiers carrying freedom across continents. They stormed beaches under machine gun fire, liberated villages under banners torn by war, and wrote their courage into history. Generals like Eisenhower and Patton became legends, leading men through hellish campaigns with grit and strategy that stunned the world. The Army Air Forces turned the skies into battlefields, and the scientists behind the Manhattan Project unlocked the most destructive power ever known. By 1945, the world had changed forever. The Axis had fallen, and the United States stood as the unmatched victor of a global war. Yet amid the triumph, soldiers wept for the brothers they lost and the horrors they had seen. As the smoke cleared and the world looked for peace, one truth became clear. The United States Army was no longer just a defender of its homeland. It was the guardian of world freedom, armed not just with weapons, but with ideals. Part 4, Cold War Titans, 1945 to 1991. The guns of World War II had barely fallen silent when a new, invisible war began. The Soviet Union rose as a rival, and a curtain of tension descended across Europe. The Cold War. The U.S. Army found itself not in open battle, but in a global standoff that demanded readiness, intelligence, and restraint. NATO was formed. Bases were built from Germany to Korea, and American soldiers became the watchmen of a divided world. The Army evolved against its doctrine, shifting from conventional combat to nuclear deterrence and rapid deployment. In Korea, the frozen hills ran red as the Army faced brutal winters and fierce battles against waves of communist forces. It was a war of endurance, and though peace came without victory, the Army proved it could fight anywhere, against anyone, under any condition. Then came Vietnam, a jungle war that tested not just tactics, but the nation's soul. Soldiers fought in dense forests, ambushed by unseen enemies, carrying the burden of politics and protest on their backs. Helicopters thundered through monsoon skies, artillery flashed across green valleys, and the Army learned painful lessons about strategy, communication, and morale. Yet even in struggle, it adapted. It built special forces, developed new technologies, and transformed warfare with mobility and intelligence. When the Cold War reached its peak, America's Army was no longer defined by numbers. Alone, it was defined by precision, speed, and presence. Satellites, stealth, aircraft, and computer systems became its new weapons. From Berlin to Baghdad, the sight of the U.S. uniform carried a message of deterrence and resolve. And when the Berlin Wall finally fell in 1989, it wasn't by chance. It was the result of decades of silent vigilance. The world watched the Soviet Empire collapse, and in that moment, the United States Army stood as the strongest force on Earth, the tip of the spear of a free world. Part 5. The Modern War Machine 1-991-2025. The dawn of the 1990s brought a new kind of war. When Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, the U.S. Army answered with Operation Desert Storm, a lightning-fast display of precision, technology, and overwhelming force. Satellites guided missiles with pinpoint accuracy. Stealth bombers struck under cover of night, and ground troops moved with unstoppable speed. The Gulf War proved that America's military dominance wasn't just in size, but in intelligence and innovation. Yet the years that followed brought new challenges. The attacks of September 11th, 2001 changed everything again, shattering the illusion of distance between home and battlefield. The U.S. Army launched into Afghanistan and later Iraq, fighting not nations, but networks' shadowy enemies who hid among civilians and fought with ideology instead of flags. These wars tested not just weapons, but endurance, patience, and adaptability. The Army learned to combine soldiers, satellites, and cyber power into one seamless system. Special forces became the sharp edge of precision warfare, their operations unseen but decisive. Drones filled the skies, collecting data and delivering strikes that redefined modern combat. The army that once charged across open fields now fought in alleys, deserts, and data streams. Yet through it all, one thing never changed: the humanity of the soldier. Behind every uniform was a story, a heartbeat, a family waiting at home. The Army's strength was not only in its technology, but in its people, their courage, sacrifice, and belief in duty. As the 21st century advanced, artificial intelligence, robotics, and autonomous systems began to join the ranks. The U.S. Army of 2025 is not just a force of muscle, but of mind diffusion of human instinct and digital precision. And though wars have changed, one truth remains unshaken. When the world calls for help, the United States Army answers. Part 6. Power Beyond Borders. The true strength of the U.S. Army is not measured only by weapons or wars. It lies in its reach, its presence, and its partnerships. With more than 700 bases across over 80 countries, the Army stands as a living network of global influence, projecting stability and reassurance in every corner of the earth. From the mountains of South Korea to the deserts of the Middle East, from NATO command posts in Europe to humanitarian missions in Africa, the stars and stripes on a soldier's shoulder symbolize more than power. They represent commitment. American soldiers train allies, build hospitals, respond to disasters, and stand guard where freedom trembles. Their boots have touched every kind of soil, their presence shaping world events without always firing a shot. This is not empire, it is an endurance, built on alliances, trust, and shared purpose. Behind the tanks and aircraft lies a deeper mission: to protect not only the borders of America, but the values that define it: freedom, equality, and justice. The Army's global footprint ensures that conflicts are contained, threats are deterred, and peace has a fighting chance. Ebedi Salut, every flag raised, every mission completed is part of a silent promise day. United States Army stands ready, not for conquest, but for balance. It is the shield that guards democracy and the hand that helps rebuild what war destroys. From training exercises in Europe to peacekeeping in Asia, the Army's power goes far beyond borders. It lives in the respect it earns, not just the battles it wins. Part 7. The future of the U.S. Army. The story of the U.S. Army is not one of endings, but of evil. As the world moves deeper into the digital age, new battlefields emerge as space, cyberspace, and artificial intelligence. The Army's next war may not be fought with tanks and bullets, but with code and data, satellites and sensors. Yet even as technology advances, the heart of the Army remains the same. The soldier machines may think, but only humans can believe. The Army of the future is being forged today: autonomous vehicles patrolling hostile terrain, drones guided by human judgment, quantum systems predicting threats before they happen. Space has become the new high ground, and the Army, alongside the Space Force, prepares to defend it. But the future of warfare is not just about destruction, it's about deterrence, precision, and protection. The modern soldier is a strategist, a technician, and a diplomat, all in one. And beyond the weapons and armor lies a simple truth: the Army's greatest power has always been its people. Every generation inherits the same promise, sworn in 1775 to defend the nation and uphold its ideals. Whether in the trenches of Europe, the jungles of Vietnam, or the virtual battlefields of tomorrow, the spirit remains unbroken. The United States Army does not just fight wars, it prevents them. It does not seek dominance, it ensures peace. As the sun rises on a new century, the Army stands ready, stronger, smarter, and more unified than ever before. And when history looks back, it will not see an empire of conquest, but a legacy of courage, the story of ordinary men and women who built the most powerful, principled, an enduring army the world has ever known.